Now that I have finalized my drawing for my word float based on my PAINTober idea, using my visual reference, I'm going to start with a wash. We always want to start with a wash to understand color placement, and it's very thin and transparent enough to where if we do make a mistake, hopefully we will be able to fix that mistake when we eventually get to building up more layers in opacity, as well as values and such. So some helpful tips and reminders for you all is that we want to make sure our water cup is on the same side as our paint, because if our water cup or our paint are on opposite sides, you're dragging your brush that is wet, possibly with color on it. Even without color, the water might ruin what color you already have on there, but you want to make sure that these are on the same side so you're not dragging your wet brush across and risking some mistakes and losing craftsmanship points. Another thing we want to start to think about, at least for me, is the idea of mixing enough of the same color and not running out. Because if I'm working on blue, I want to make sure that I'm not doing different blues for each segment. I'm not going to paint all this blue because I have to leave space and gaps for this rope here, which has highlights and shadows on it. Okay, so you see highlights on the left-hand side and shadows on the right-hand side, but I wouldn't paint my blue all the way on top because I would lose the ability to add those ropes. But that being said, we're going to paint each segment, but we want to make sure we're mixing enough of the same color so that each segment is the same color, as well as all this yellow here. There are obviously some darker areas and lighter areas, but we want to make sure we keep the integrity of all the same yellow, even though it might be a darker yellow versus a lighter yellow. But we don't want splotchy, random kind of colors all coming together that don't make sense. Okay, watercolors are dry. They are all clean. Every single cake still has the integrity of the color it is. We always start with water on our brush. And now I'll go ahead and start with the sky, since that's what I was just talking about. Develop some blues. We want to make sure we have more water than paint to begin with. That will create a wash and a transparent blue. If you remember doing our color theory sheets of transparent to opaque, we understood that mixing more water with less paint will make it more transparent. Okay. I might add a touch of violet to my blue. So I'm going to add just the slightest little bit of violet to make it more that deeper blue kind of color. And then I also do have a few little clouds towards the bottom, and I want to make sure that I keep the integrity of the white paper for those clouds because I don't have white paint. Okay, so now you can see that little drip I just had right there, almost got some craftsmanship situation going on. That's why we keep everything on the same side. I didn't do that intentionally. That was a mistake. All right, so I'm going to come in and develop my sky color. Once again, keeping the integrity of the wires. When you draw something in terms of a rope or a wire or something very skinny, it's not just one straight line. You can notice here how I have developed two lines on either side to develop that form. One side has the light source, one side has the shadow. So if I just drew one straight line, that would not do justice for what needs to happen in terms of having a three-dimensional object. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. If not, I'm always here to answer questions. But you want to go right up against that edge. You never want to paint wet next to wet unless you are intentionally doing it and have a reason to do it, because if we do wet next to wet, then the colors will bleed together. I obviously haven't painted my rope yet, but when I get to that point, the next thing I paint would not be these ropes right here or the edge of the hot air balloon here or even the pole right there, because if my blue is still wet, then I would risk the idea of bleeding those colors into one another. When you start with a wash, you always want to usually focus on using your largest brush to cover the most surface area as quickly as possible. Obviously, if it's a smaller little area, you'll want to use a smaller brush. You are becoming your own painters, And so you will need to understand what is best for you. You have 12 brushes. You have the ability to use a flat edge brush. You have the ability to use a round tip brush. You are becoming an artist and need to start picking and choosing what you believe is best for whatever you are painting. Okay, I came in with that little area, but I had way too much blue on my paint, or blue on my paintbrush. So I avoided that area, moved to the next area to utilize what is on the brush. I still think I have way too much on there, so I'm going to get rid of some of the paint, and then I'm going to come back and even this out. Because if I had too much paint, that would be way too much water and liquid, and I want to create a nice even application. Okay, now I'm going to come in and go right up against that edge as well on this side. Get right up against the border I created. You don't need to create a border, but if you choose to do so, then you will go right up against the edge of that as well. Filling in all the blue. It looks like it's a little bit darker, so I can definitely build up more layers and opacity towards the closer side of the hot air balloon, because that side looks like it has darker values of blue, and then it starts to get lighter towards the bottom. So I would eventually build up more layers of blue, but right now we're just focusing on the wash and applying color where it belongs, going right up against the edges, making sure that we have a successful drawing before we start painting, because if your drawing isn't successful, then your painting can't be successful, because you have to do the drawing before you start painting. Okay, flattening that out, trying to make sure all the blues keep the integrity all together. Remember, I added just the slightest little bit of purple to it to get that deeper blue value. Okay, rotating my body and doing whatever's most comfortable for me. I think pulling towards myself is the most comfortable position for that angle right there. You can always rotate and turn your paper. I am a big advocate of that, but with the camera and the situation that it is, sometimes I don't have the ability to do so. So I will give it my best effort to rotate my body around my paper and showcase the idea of the direction you pull your brush and move your brush helps along the way. It looks like I'm starting to run out of blue, so it doesn't look like I made enough. Make sure you are keeping that in mind. Once again, this is probably where I would rotate my paper, but just to ensure the fact, keeping it straight for you guys to see, I'm really twisting and turning my body and making sure I don't smear what I already have on the paper, because we do not want to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to develop a little bit more that blue color. Once again, lots of water. And then I just added the slightest touch of purple. Clean my brush off. I never want to use color already on the brush into another area. Water that down. Take some off. It might be a little bit too much moisture on the brush. And come in and understand exactly where all the blue is going to be located. So there's this negative space. Negative space is the area between the positive space. So my hand would be the positive space, and the negative space would be all the areas in between. So this would be the negative space right here. So if you ever hear me talk about that, positive and negative space, that is what I mean. All right, so it looks like I have accomplished my first layer of blue. These clouds still have a little bit of blue reference to them, so I did paint over that area, and then when I start to build up more value of the blue, I'm going to avoid that specific spot because I still wanted a little bit of blue on there, because they're not like big white fluffy clouds. They're still a little bit on the transparent side. I'm not sure, scientifically speaking, what type of clouds those are. Stratus, cumulus nimbus. It's been a while since I've been in a science class. But I can start to maybe build up closer to the hot air balloon for my second layer. You never want to work super wet on wet because it will start to lose the integrity of the paper. We might start to tear it, but this is dry by now. Just a little wet to the touch, but not super wet, to where I can build up another layer. Once again, we talked about how it was darker blue closer to the hot air balloon, and then it starts to fade out. For me, I want to make sure they're all fading out in the same spot so they stay consistent. Once again, you might, in your painting, have nothing to do with this idea, but I want you guys to watch these videos and utilize them to understand all the techniques and thought processes that go through my mind while I am painting, so you can take those skills and knowledge to your painting. Okay, then I'll start to once again fade it out into that lighter transparent blue. This is just like our color theory idea, moving from opaque to transparent, and instead of doing boxes, I'm just blending them all together. Same concept I'm going to use for the rest of the hot air balloon. I will do another video and probably do no commentary for it, so you can just watch me paint and skip around and figure out what it looks like to complete a successful painting. Hopefully successful. I have confidence in my abilities to do so, but we will see. Alright, so build up that last little bit right here. I'll definitely let this blue dry before I add another layer, because it is still a little bit on the transparent side. And then also, when I move on to another part of the painting, I want to absolutely positively make sure I am not doing anything, once again, right up against the edge of what I just did, because they will bleed together. Okay, skip that little bit of area because that's where that cloud's going to go, so you can start to see how I'm leaving a lighter area on the paper, more transparent, to develop the idea of where those clouds are going to take place. All right, so that would be layer one of the sky. Okay, there's no other sky going on over here, up there, down here, so I have successfully painted exactly the same color where I needed it to be. Next, I'll move on to the hot air balloon, understand the lighter values of the colors, the darker values of the colors. I'll definitely utilize the idea of complementary colors with mixing purple with the yellow or violet. Definitely mixing green with the reds to develop some of these shadows, because if you add black, it might be way too aggressive. And the fact that you're able to mix a lot of red with a little bit of green to get that neutral kind of color, you sometimes are in more control, because black is such an aggressive color and dominates the other colors you mix it with. Okay, so I'll pay attention to detail, I'll pay attention to colors, I'll pay attention to value, and when I'm paying attention to all those things, I am developing form and three-dimensionality. All right, happy painting!